How do you keep your phone charged if there is no power? How do you keep your fridge running? And more importantly, how do you keep those critical medical devices going when the electricity is out? I think a lot of times we sort of forget to plan for the worst case scenarios, but the reality is that in a given year, 1 out of every 4 Americans is going to experience a power outage. And in 2023, which is the last year that data is available for so far, there were over 25 million Americans who experienced significant power outages, which means they were without power for at least 6 hours or more. For most of us, we know that power can be fickle, that rolling power outages have become more and more common in the United States. And if you watched last week's video, we talked all about what to do to stay cool if you didn't have AC or power running. Today, we are going to talk about some alternative power sources. But before we just dive into what I think you should be thinking about from a prepper, I want to frame this in terms of why you should be worried about kind of power situations, how you can come up with a backup power plan, and finally, just some practical tips that you can use to make sure that your house is ready no matter what is going on around you. Welcome back to Preparedness. My name is Laura. We talk about emergency preparedness and self-sufficiency on this channel, and I'm glad you're here today because we are talking about something that I think sometimes gets overlooked, and that is how do we keep the power on in an emergency situation? Now, again, we started by just saying that 1 in 4 Americans are going to experience a power outage in any given year, and while a lot of times those are really short-lived power outages, they can extend to multiple days and even longer in certain kind of cases. A lot of times for extreme weather, for rolling heat waves, for anything like that that could disrupt your power grid for a more extended period of time, we want to be thinking about how do we get ready for such an event. So why is this important? Why are we talking about it and why do I care? Well, the first reason is just communication. When the power goes out and we can't kind of keep our devices charged, it is really hard for us to stay informed about what is going on around us. So, I'm a big fan of using our phones for alerts and notifications and even kind of news headlines. Well, if you run out of power and you don't have access to a TV, you don't have access to a radio maybe, or your cell phone is dead and you can't get that information, really being cut off from communication is something that you're going to want to think about from a kind of just power perspective. Power is what allows us to stay informed. Power is what allows us to stay connected with the people around us. And really, we have gotten used to always having a device ready and available to get the information that we're seeking. The first thing to think about from a power outage perspective is just when the power is out, those things start becoming more and more difficult as the time goes on. And so having a backup power plan can help you ensure that you are staying connected, staying informed, and that you're able to reach the people that you care about in an emergency situation. The second reason is health and safety. Again, last week we talked about the dangers of high temperatures and no power, no AC, think heat stroke, think heat exhaustion. When we are talking about health and safety, it can be a heat-related event, but can also be things that involve maybe medical machinery, right? So if you have somebody in your family who requires medical devices to help keep them healthy, to help keep them strong, if the power goes out, you need to be thinking about ways to keep those devices running regardless of what is going on around you, because they could truly be life-saving. And we want to make sure that we're thinking through those things. The third part is just security and sanitation. So I bring that up because as I've moved out to the middle of nowhere, Oklahoma, I find that when my power goes out, so does the pump on my well, which means that I can't get water flow through my toilet and sink, so I can't flush the toilet. So even though I have a septic system, without planning ahead, I can't just turn on my normal toilet and get water running through my house because my well doesn't work. So thinking through things like sanitation have become more important to me here than they used to be when I lived in Colorado, where I was on more of the standard utility system that we had going on. Also, security becomes something that we might want to think about. So for a lot of us, we have home security systems, right? So maybe those are Ring cameras or doorbells that alert us if someone's going on. Maybe we have security cameras up in the area, a home alarm system like ADT or something like that. When the power goes out, those systems no longer work. So it's something just to kind of keep in the back of your mind. What do you lose from a security perspective if you no longer have power? And I think those 3 things, the communication, the health and medical stuff, and security and sanitation, are things that we just don't even a lot of times think about. We think about things like the AC, our fridge going out, or our freezer thawing all of the food that we have, and we think about our cell phones kind of going down. But really, power outages can affect a lot more than that. And so we want to be thinking about this as a holistic system, because a lot of times we think about the easy things to fix, but we don't think through some of the more challenging things, like how am I going to keep power to my refrigerator or my freezer so that my food doesn't spoil? How am I going to make sure that my house can stay secure even if stuff is going on around me and maybe the power outages have been caused by something more serious like a riot or some sort of civil unrest? How do I then stay secure without the normal power things that I have on a day-to-day basis? So the first thing to do when you are thinking about your power kind of system and how you want to be prepared is just thinking through the priorities that you have. If you have somebody somebody who is on life-saving medical devices, that is probably going to be one of the first things that you think about. How do I keep power to? And then you're going to kind of flow down from there. What is most important? What is most critical? What are the things that you truly cannot live without? And then how do you plan to power those things in an emergency situation? And then as we go down, the priorities become less and less important and or just more creature comfort type of things, like how are you going to run your toaster oven so you can have a yummy meal? But you get the point that you want to be thinking about the priorities that you have and what is important to you when you are coming up with your power plan. And the reason that is important is because for most of us, we're going to have to make trades in this space when we start talking about backup power. To do a whole house generator, to do something that is going to truly allow us to be off grid for an extended period of time, you are talking about relatively expensive systems. You're talking about solar power and backup batteries. You're talking about whole house generators that can run for multiple days or potentially weeks, which requires a lot of fuel and systems like that. So for most of us, that is not where we're going to start, right? We're going to start with a little bit easier things, but we still want to be thinking about what those number one priorities are. And so as you are walking through this exercise of thinking about what you would do without power, walk through your normal day and think about all of the things that you use on a daily basis that use power. Some of those things may not just be automatically, ready for you to think about. For instance, I live in the country on a well that requires power to keep water flowing to my house. That is something that I didn't have to consider before I moved out here. And so that changed the prioritization of what I would want to keep powered in a kind of grid down scenario. So think through that priority list so that you can come up with your strategies for how to keep things powered. The second thing to think about from a priorities perspective is how long do you want to keep things running? Are you preparing for just a few hours of power outage? Are you preparing for a few days? Are you really trying to figure out how do I start replacing power for an extended power grid issue? Think something like a cyber attack, something that really truly disrupts the grid for an extended period of time. Maybe you have an incident that's going to take power down for a week or more. It could be a severe storm like the hurricanes that we saw in North Carolina and the flooding. So think about how long you want to be prepared for. And there's no right answer to this, guys. Like, this is truly what makes you feel confident and calm and really allows you to sleep well at night, right? So that may be a few hours. Maybe that's the normal kind of power outage situation that you think you are going to experience. Maybe that is, hey, I want to be as self-sufficient as possible so that I do not have to plug into anything or worry about the grid going down, and I can still run the things that are most important to me. It doesn't matter where you are on that spectrum. You just want to think about that prioritization scheme because it is going to inform, again, the kind of power backup options that you have. So once you come up with that prioritization, kind of that strategy that you are looking for in terms of what you want to keep running and how long you want to keep it running, then we're going to talk about really layering what I'm going to call our power defenses, right? So this is layering the things that are going to allow us to keep power flowing in our homes. The first step, and probably the easiest and the one that I absolutely recommend for everyone watching this channel, is just small portable power devices. That can be something like a solar battery charger. This is just a device that you can leave in a window. You can charge small devices. This is going to be able to charge things like cell phones, like iPads, potentially a laptop if you had one running, an emergency radio. It could also potentially power a small medical device, but it would depend on how much that device pulled and how much wattage that it had. So that is something you're also going to want to consider when you're looking at your prioritization, is how much power do these things pull, so that you know how much power you need to really have to fill that backup need. The reason I love chargers like this are just because they're incredibly portable. They're small. You can keep them in vehicles. You can keep them in packs. You can keep them in your house. Again, we keep one in each of our cars so that if we got stuck somewhere, we could just toss them up in our dash, be able to, again, charge phones, charge devices that could also charge things like rechargeable lanterns and flashlights, things like that, where you have just kind of the fundamental basics. So absolutely everyone watching this channel should be buying some of these small portable devices that you can use to charge. Next up are just portable power stations, or like you've heard me talk about before, we have a Jackery. So this is literally a giant battery that gets recharged with solar panels. This is its own internal kind of power system. It is enough to run a small fridge, to cycle a freezer, to pretty much charge any of our electric devices that we have in our house. It's not going to run big things, right? I'm not going to be able to run things like blow dryers, toaster ovens, microwaves, anything like that, but it's going to be able to charge devices that you need kind of to keep charged on a regular, consistent basis. Again, think flashlights, think lanterns, think cell phones, think emergency radios. This is a great option for those types of things. Also, depending on the size of kind of backup generator or power bank that you get, you can charge things like freezers and refrigerators if you are cycling power. You need to look at how many watts and amp hours that these generate, and then you need to look at how much your devices pull. One of the things that we did when we first got this is we literally just plugged our refrigerator in to see how much power it pulled off of this, and then did some rough calculations for how long we would be able to keep our refrigerator turned on. Now, with this, our plan was plug the refrigerator in, cycle it for a little bit, keep the stuff cool, unplug it, let this charge back up with our solar panels, and then cycle the refrigerator again, right? It is not going to keep your refrigerator necessarily at a perfectly constant temperature, but hopefully it will keep it going well enough to not spoil food. We were also going to do that with our backup freezer. So having a couple of these charging stations or battery backups, especially with solar panels, is probably, again, my second recommendation for, again, almost everyone watching this channel. You can get them on great sales. There's still an investment, but they are going to really kind of be able to meet a majority of your needs. So to put it in context, we can take 2 of these on a camping trip with our travel trailer, and we can run completely off grid with our travel trailer. And this runs, again, everything but the microwave and the air conditioner. Now, one thing to note, if you're using solar powered anything, is that you have to have the sunshine, right, to continue to keep this charged. If you're thinking about a extended bad weather situation, like think a winter storm or something like that, solar may only work so well for so long, because if you can't get a good kind of, open sky and sunlight, you're not going to be able to keep the solar panels charged. And then at some point, this battery, which, because again, this is really just a giant battery, it's going to deplete, and then you are not going to be able to charge things. So I absolutely love solar power. I think it's amazing. It is one of my go-tos, but just recognize that there are some limits to solar power. So you just want to think through that as well. Then the next layer of just kind of power generation, if you will, are just bigger backup systems. This can be whole home systems. Think things like Generac. There are other companies, but Generac's the most probably common one. That is literally where they come in, they put a backup power source absolutely wired into your house so that when the power kind of comes off at the utility company, your backup generator turns on. You don't even necessarily notice it in your house. It's a pretty seamless transition. Those generators only run for as long as you have fuel. And so depending on the type of fuel you have, depending on how long your house is without power, depending on what you are trying to run in your house, those are not going to necessarily keep you going nonstop, but they are a great resource to have, especially if you live someplace where you get severe weather, you get severe storms, you know that you have power outages on a kind of consistent basis. Think like Midwest, where you get snowstorms and may lose power lines because of ice storms. Colorado, again, we used to lose power because, again, of cold weather. Here we lose power because of tornadoes and branches down on power lines. So think about your location and whether or not a whole house generator is something that may be worth investing in. We recently invested in a portable generator that is powerful enough to run everything in our house minus the air conditioner. So we actually had our house that we are building here wired in such a way that we can plug our house basically into the generator, and the generator becomes our source of power. If the power goes out here, we would switch our power coming into our main house. We would put our generator on, and we would be able to run everything in our house. Again, our lights, our fridge, microwave, all of those things minus the air conditioner from that generator. That generator also is dual fuel, which means it can run off of gasoline or propane. The beauty of that for us is we do have some gasoline stored and we could run it off of that, but we also have a propane tank already because we are running a propane stove. So having a propane tank on hand just allows us to run that generator a little bit longer. If you have a whole house generator or something like that, recognize that you can also cycle those. That means you don't have to necessarily run them straight to kind of just keep that constant power. You can turn them on, you can turn down your fridge, you can charge things up, and then you can turn them off. It just conserves fuel and allows you to kind of stretch the amount of time that you can keep your house on power in an emergency situation. You'll have to do the calculations for how much power your house pulls. This is a math formula that I'm not going to try to explain on this video, but there's a lot of great resources out there that will show you how to calculate the overall needs of your house and then what size generator you should get. So if you are feeling like you are ready to go to that next level, you really want to invest a little bit more money, having a whole house generator like a Generac or a portable one that you can actually plug in. Again, takes a little bit of wiring and electrician to come and fix all of that up so that you can do it, but that is also a great backup option. And then the next level, when you are ready to really go, I would just say all in, is to have a solar system that can run your entire house. house. But again, those systems start getting very pricey, a lot more installation, a lot more stuff that's really beyond the scope of, I would say, what most of us are ready to do. Although my husband and I do have plans at some point to do a solar system that could run our house minus the air conditioner here in Oklahoma so that we have that backup power option. But that is a big investment, requires obviously battery banks, the solar panels themselves, etc. One thing to note, if you have solar panels and you work with your local electric company, sometimes those solar panels can allow you to run power in an emergency situation, but just make sure that you read the contract, because I have heard of some places in cities and states where if the power grid is down, they basically shut off your solar panels. So even though you think you might have solar, they may limit the ability to pull power off of those. I'm not super smart on all of that and how that works, but just recognize that if you have solar panels that are provided for you by your electric company that you paid for, but that are still plugged into the normal electric grid, you just want to read the fine print and make sure you know when you will have access to that power and whether or not it's going to work in an emergency situation when the grid is down, because you don't want to assume that you have solar power and then find out when the emergency really happens that maybe the company turns those solar panels off because they reserve the right to do that in the contract. Again, depends on where you live, how those contracts are written. So just make sure you read the fine print. When I'm talking solar systems, I'm talking more kind of the off-grid solar systems that people install themselves that have panels that pull straight from sun, charge batteries in their house, and then run their whole house system. So those are the levels that you want to be thinking about from a layering perspective. It depends on what you're trying to power and how long you want to be powered, where you stop in that kind of thing. Start with the small portable stuff, start with the easy things, graduate to a power bank like a Jackery or EcoFlow. There's a bunch of brands that are really good out there that are great and have good records. So buy some solar panels, buy a battery bank like that so that you can have that kind of intermediate power. And then when you are feeling like you're ready to jump to the next phase, that whole house generator or portable generator is a great option. So those kind of the flow of how to keep electricity running in your home. But again, you need to calculate it off of the devices that you have and how long you want to be running. And then just the pro tip on this is test everything. Make sure that if you have solar devices that you are keeping them charged. We go and check our Jackeries about once every month, every 60 days. They stay charged pretty well, but you want to make sure that you are keeping those devices charged so that if an emergency happens, you are not all of a sudden out of luck and waiting for sunshine to shine to get your devices to a point where you can actually then charge things. So make sure whatever you're using that you run it, you test it. If you have generators, make sure that you're cycling them to make sure that everything is working well. Test. Make sure you know how you are going to power things ahead of time and have a plan. So as you lay out your devices, as you figure out what you want to do, write yourself a little note to say, hey, I'm going to charge my phone with my solar battery bank that I just keep kind of charged all the time. I'm going to charge my bigger medical devices with my Jackery or my EcoFlow, whatever the system may be. Go ahead and plan out how you are going to charge things. And then again, test those on a regular basis. I would even run a test to see how long you can keep things charged with the devices that you have and the power sources that you are choosing, because that way it will give you an idea of what you're really going to experience in an emergency situation. Don't get caught off guard thinking, hey, I have some stuff to charge it, and then find out that's really only enough to keep things charged for a few hours. And then after that, you're out of power. So test it, run it, practice. As you know, if you are buying gear, I am always going to encourage you to practice with the gear and learn how to use it so that you are not caught trying to figure it out in the emergency situation, because that is not the stress that you need, my friend. So that's it. So you are now ready to face a snowstorm, a tornado, a power outage of any sort. This gives you the baseline for what to do to figure out how to keep your family ready for anything and not afraid of those power outages that we know are pretty common in the United States these days. Until next time, let's be prepared, not scared.